thank you all very much for joining us for this, the Beyond Accessibility, Building Leaders in Public Sector and Government Roles in Europe. We're delighted to have you join us. My name is Blackmore. I'm the Emerging Leaders Coordinator for the International Initiative for Disability Leadership and the International Initiative for Mental Health Leadership, and I'm someone with a living experience of neurodivergence. This webinar is proudly presented in partnership with the Swedish Agency for Participation and the organisation that I work for. So some quick introductory remarks from me, and then we'll move into an introduction from Malin Ekman-Aldén, and then our panel session. So what will happen from this session are two things. One is the connections that all of you have the opportunity to build with each other, and we really encourage you to stay in touch with each other. And the second is that we will be creating a write-up in line with the key insights that we hear from the group today. Fundamentally today, we want to talk about the importance of building careers, not just jobs, and how do we make this easier for everyone. We've got a mix of 11 countries registered for this session, and lots of different experiences. So we have people in government, people in not-for-profit roles, people who are established leaders, and people who are emerging leaders. And we have lots of people with lived experience joining us today. And so with that, I want to acknowledge and celebrate people with lived and living experience, and those who love and care for them, and really celebrate and acknowledge the value that their insights and contributions make to all of our conversations and all of our ways of making positive change in the world. So in line with that, we want to have robust and respectful discussions. Part of that is because we're coming from so many different countries, our language is different. Sometimes we use person first language, sometimes we use experience first language. And so I just want to point that out and acknowledge that everyone's using the right language for the country and context that they work in. And that's okay, and that we're all working from that same philosophy of building good lives for each other. And also just, we operate in the emerging leaders context from a base of respect and kindness, and that's really important. So as we're moving through our discussions, we want to always work respectfully and kindly with each other. We will have interactive sessions in the breakout room, and from those, we'll come back to the main room. You have a moderator with you in your breakout, and those moderators will give us a little report back. We do have the automated captioning enabled in Zoom, and we also have a break scheduled to reduce cognitive load. We do have the chat disabled, and that's an accessibility measure as well. So with those quick introductions, let me hand over the session to Malin Ekman-Aldén, who is the Director General of the Swedish Agency for Participation. Malin.
Thank you so much. And I can also say a small welcome from the Agency for Participation, who's been co-organizing this with IIDL, which has really been losing my a great opportunity. Some technical problem for me here. Let's see. Can you still hear me?
Loud and clear, Malin.
Okay. So. Right, sorry about that. So my name is Malin Ekman-Aldén, and I'm the Director General, and I have a long experience from working in the public sector, and I also been acting as a director in different positions the last almost 25 years. And during this rather long time now, I always dreamt of a seminar or a meeting like this, because I think as a person with disabilities, in my case, I'm visually impaired. I have often felt rather lonely in the situation I'm in with my personal disability, and had very few persons around me to share thoughts, problems, ideas, and other things around working as a leader but also with a disability. And this can include both practical issues, obviously, but also sometimes more psychological. So I'm really happy for this initiative, and I hope that it will continue and that there will be other opportunity to continue the discussion. So because of that, I'm really honored also to be able to start up this meeting. And even though I think the key part is really the discussions that we will have. And the topic of today, to build leaders within disability, is really in government and public sector, is really a needed and very important one. As I explained, it's a personal question for me, but I also think looking at it as a very important issue of democracy, really. And I don't think anybody here in Europe knows the number of persons with disabilities that are today acting as leaders or in leadership positions within government or public sector. I considering the fact that in most countries the public sector is not having, you may say, the leader jersey when it comes to hiring persons with disability, we could suspect that the numbers are rather limited. And I hope today during this event we will have the opportunity to discuss and elaborate and explore different solutions and explanations why this is the case and what can be made to change it to a different situation. And you may start to ask, why is it really this issue really very important to talk about, except for what I told earlier. I think the mission of the public sector is really involving all citizens in a society. And that would naturally, as from my point of view, also require that people employed and as employees and leaders in the public sector also need to represent the diversity of experience that a community and a society contains. And this is obviously not the case today. And the explanation can be rather complex, and there are many aspects of that. But I try to figure on some concrete situations that might actually contribute to the lack of opportunities that is in many countries today. I can't be sure of every country, but that is my impression anyway. I think generally in the public sector, and obviously this can be transferred to a larger scale, there is still a lack of commitment, but also understanding of what diversity actually means in practice. I think most organizations would today say that they believe in diversity, they understand the importance of it, they would see it as a issue of sustainability, but still many organizations do not take the step and practice this knowledge and this understanding and this talk into practice, and that is still a great problem coming to disability. It's also a lack of commitment in the way that even though you put it in your policy, you talk about it, you are even put it into your training programs, there has to be a genuine commitment also, especially in the leadership of an organization, to actually do something about it. And I think that is still lacking because of different reasons, obviously, but still. I think we are in the public sector, and sorry for generalizing, maybe you are much more ahead in other countries, but I can only transfer from my Swedish experience. I think we still are rather traditional, a bit inflexible, and a bit exclusive when we come to recruitment, but also how we view competency. And this is a great obstacle for persons with disability. Because with a disability, it's not always the kind of education and training that is different or lacking, but because of the discrimination many people actually experience in their work life, the opportunity to actually get in and have many opportunities of doing different things is also a kind of discrimination. And if you are very narrow in your view of competency, that will actually be a great obstacle, because you can never be able to fight with the same kind of CV as other people, as you never had the opportunity. So it's like a negative loop for many people, and that is why recruitment and view of competency is such a important but also very critical area. I think still many organizations, workplaces also, especially also in the public sector, is lacking in physical and social working conditions and accessibility for people with disabilities. And this can also include how we are organizing our workplace and how we are actually, well, we're organizing and also the organization of work in our workplaces. And this can be obvious things like lacking opportunities to actually get around, drink your coffee, work efficiently, have the equipment you need, whatever. But it's in many workplaces, the big problem is also the lack of social inclusion and the lack of understanding of social diversity, and that is really excluding a lot of persons with disabilities. Another area that I think is really important to think more about is the lacking expectations on people with disabilities when it comes to leadership. This lack of expectations is, in a way, institutionalized within our societies. As a whole, it's in the workplace or in the work area, but it's also indeed in the institutions of education. And it doesn't only go with university and vocational training programs. It starts much earlier. I think if we were really honest, and when we look at young children, maybe in the first classes, I think we will have really different expectations if the child have a severe disability or not, on what is actually the life expectations, especially also in work life. And expectations from the outside are very quickly becoming expectations from the inside. So this is really an important issue, because it's also in many cases lack of confidence and expectations on yourself as an individual. And this is maybe the most saddest and the most difficult thing to change if you are brought up and within your whole education situation with this around you, and are always also in a way emphasizing them yourself, even though that was obviously not what you were born with, but that is something you've learned very early. So this is really also something that needs to be explored and discussed, and how can we change this, and what does it require? As a person with disability in work life, there is also a great lack of role models, especially when you come to leadership. And lack of role models also means lack of opportunities to share experience with other people that are in a similar situation to yourself. And also, if you look outside, there are also very few opportunities for leaders with disabilities to mirror themselves in others, and that could be mirroring through media, other leadership training programs, whatever. You are, as I tried to say in the beginning, I think you are often left quite lonely, and when it's hard to, and which in a different way that other people are. And this is really also a great obstacle in career, and also in developing as a leader or going into leadership. So there is rather different and many different, I think, obstacles, but obviously, as we hear on the fantastic persons that are participating today and also giving speeches, there are also so many good examples of people that are in leadership roles or have thought about it and that can share experience. So I think we also have a lot of positive examples that we need to be better on actually collecting, sharing, networking, and so on. And as especially for our European countries, there is, I mean, if you look at it globally, we would be quite a few people having this kind of roles in government or in other public organizations. But even though you can feel a bit lonely where you actually are, but if we could maybe through this kind of networking join together and together try to explore and find out and also support each other, I think this is a great opportunity. And in that way we could also act role models for emerging leaders or young people that will be emerging leaders in a few years and so on. That is also a responsibility of ours to do that. So I think this is really an important event, and I wish everybody good luck, and I hope that it will actually be a great start to something that we can jointly continue together. And so I'd like to thank you so much, and I look forward to the seminar. And I feel confident in the language issue. We don't use a lot of English. I feel a bit rusty, but I hope you understand what I said. Thank you so much, and well, let's continue.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Malin, for those opening reflections and remarks. So from one fantastic role model, let me introduce you to four more. So Clenton Farquarson is the chair of Think Local, Act Personal partnership in the United Kingdom, and is also an international board member with our organisation, the International Initiative for Disability Leadership. We'll be hearing from him via video in just a moment, as unfortunately he wasn't able to join us. You just find let me introduce you to Sif Holst, who's also an experienced board member, the vice chair of Disabled People's Organisation in Denmark. Matt Frost is sorry, I'm just adding people as I'm doing this. Matt Frost is a senior public servant. He is the principal advisor for strategy, policy and partnerships at Farquarson, the Ministry for Disabled People in New Zealand. And we're also joined by the Honourable Carla Qualtrough, the Minister for Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion in the Canadian Government. So thank you all for joining us. As I say, I'm going to play the video from Clenton so that we can draw on his remarks as we move into our panel discussion. So let me just cue that up now.
I wish I was there in person with you all having this discussion, but also I want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak on this topic, which is a really important topic. And as I sit before you, to emphasise the crucial aspects of our society that often goes unnoticed, the importance of building leaders with disability in government and public sector roles. In an era where inclusion and diversity are at the forefront of our collective awareness, it's vital, I think, that we recognise the immense value of individuals with disabilities that bring in our lives, not just the workplace, in our lives generally. And for me, it's beyond accessibility. It's beyond the mere removal of the physical barriers. It lies a profound transformation in our perception of accessibility and disability. And it's also about fostering an understanding that individuals with disabilities are not defined by our challenges, but rather by our talents, skills, and unique perspectives that we bring. And when we have an open heart and minds to this truth, we can unlock a world of untapped potential. And if we just think about that for a moment, untapped potential, and it's about human potential. Now, I think creating a society that truly thrives on inclusivity That then makes us stretch what we mean by leadership in all its forms. That's what I've learned on my journey. By embracing individuals with disabilities as leaders, we can enrich a patchwork, like a patchwork quilt of leadership itself, and we bring forth a multitude of experiences, ideas, insights that are essential for the development of our society as a whole. That's the perspective I've learned, and to consider the tremendous impact that leaders with disabilities have had throughout history. So if we think about Franklin D. Roosevelt, who led the United States through some of its darkest days, while grappling with the challenges of polio. And then think about Helen Keller, who overcame deafness and blindness to become an influential advocate, and our own in the UK, Stephen Hawking, who used his fame to raise awareness of what people needed to thrive when they're living with a disability and for disability rights. These are, for me, remarkable individuals that demonstrated the power of resilience, determination, and adaptability that can be harnessed in the workplace and for leaders with disabilities. Yet, despite progression, we have made there's still significant barriers still persist in not just the workplace, but in society itself. There's stereotypes, there's prejudice, there's societal norms that often marginalise individuals with disabilities and prevent us from accessing the same opportunities for leadership that non-disabled counterparts enjoy. It's our collective responsibility to dismantle those barriers, to challenge the status quo, and to create an environment where all voices are not only heard, but also actively included. So when we embrace leaders with disability, whether that's in government or public sector roles, we foster a culture of inclusivity and equality, and we send a powerful message to society that declares that no one should be defined by our disabilities, but rather by our abilities, our character, and our commitment to service.
So some very powerful comments to start us off from Clenton. And there's, if any of you know Clenton, a conversation with him is always wonderful. So the full video is about 11 or 12 minutes long, which we'll hopefully share after this session. But let's start by talking to our wonderful panelists. And Sif, I'd love if you could tell us a bit about, you've got this amazing 20-year career in advocacy and board roles. Tell us about your career journey. How did you get to where you are now?
One thing was that before I became a disability activist, I was a youth politician. So for me, bringing this, the learning, being a young woman in politics, with honestly a lot of sexism, but also a lot of learning from other women. You know, you have to be aware of this, the way the power moves around. You know, what is happening in a meeting. When I supposed to do something and when I'm doing suppose something else. I think for me, that was something I brought into the disability movement, because honestly, we do also have issues in the disability movement, being a young woman, as I was at the time, but also having that experience from outside of disability. policies. And for me, throughout, it has been so interesting always, learning from the women's movement, now learning from Black Lives Matter, learning from the LGBT plus community, all the time, because so many of the struggles as a minority, we can learn so much from each other and from the analysis of what is happening around us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sif. And Matt, we'd love to know a bit more about you. How did you get to your senior public service role?
Thanks, Ashley, and it's lovely to be part of this panel. I'm speaking at 2 o'clock in the morning here, and in some ways, that resonates in terms of Clinton's comment, the last comment about service. Parts of service are you stretch yourself into new spaces and new leadership ideas. Look, for me, I've always been interested in politics, and I've always been interested in how to use those levers. My special field of interest, I'm autistic, is New Zealand politics and Parliament, and I have always been keen to use those insights to serve others. I guess what I found really interesting was I wasn't a career public servant. I tried to be, so I applied to various public service agencies here when I started my career. I think in retrospect, I made an interesting choice then. I was really open about having autism, and I think that was a disadvantage to me early on, if I'm being really frank, because I think people looked at that rather than the skills that I had. And so I had a slightly interesting journey into public service. I worked for NGOs for 10 years. And so I built a reputation within those NGOs for innovative thinking and diverse thinking, and I was really fortunate in the role models and leaders that I had. I was fortunate to meet Eddie in 2007, and so I kind of had a circuitous way into public service, and have been in public service now for about 6 or 7 years in a variety of roles, mainly related to disability. I think I'm at the moment, I'm really enjoying extending that a little bit. So for example, I'm working in the international disability rights space. We had our examination last year. I did the lead preparation for that in Geneva, our examination on implementation. And I also am preparing our briefings and insights into COSP. So look forward to seeing Minister Qualtrough hopefully there next week. But so I think, I guess I had quite a interesting way into public service, and I think it's very common for disabled people. But what it's also made me think is, how do we get past the attitudinal barriers, particularly early on, that say, actually, I've got skills and contributions I want to offer, and that the fact that I have autism is an additional element and a plus to that, rather than a conversation stopper.
Thank you, Matt. That's great reflections, and we'll get into the barriers a bit in a moment. But you made a nice bridge as well to Minister Qualtrough, who we'd love to hear some more from you, Minister, about your career journey. Similarly to what Matt was talking about, you've had many different careers and pathways.
Well, thank you. First of all, thanks so much for the invitation to be here. I'm just super excited to have this conversation and can relate to the loneliness that Malin talked about and kind of the crazy career path that Matt talked about, because I'm certainly not a career politician. I'm a very kind of single issue policy wonk with a background in human rights law and disability advocacy, who was approached by the then leader, Justin Trudeau, to run to be Canada's first ever disability minister. So I was very much plucked out of my world, and I was going along fine. But my background isn't really in sport, actually, as an athlete and a volunteer. What I would share with you is I actually don't think I'd be where I am today as a significantly visually impaired cabinet minister, if it weren't for sport and my exposure and the lessons I learned in the sport system here in Canada and around the world, particularly in the Paralympic movement, about what inclusion can look like and about what we can do to build systems that are inclusive from the beginning, not just accommodate after the fact, not like just, in Canada, we lean very heavily on what we call the duty to accommodate, this idea that there's a legal obligation to figure out a way to include somebody, but it only really kicks in after someone's discriminated against. And I found that super frustrating in my career as a human rights lawyer, and became fascinated with this idea of backing the system up and designing a system that was inclusive from the beginning. And just, learned so much through my involvement in sport about how to self-advocate, how to sit on a board of directors, how to contribute to governance in a world where a lot of people were like me, because growing up, a lot of people weren't like me. And it really impacted the choices I made after secondary school to go to law school. I got to travel the world with my swimming career and was exposed to incredible demonstrations of ability, but also a ton of discrimination. And I would go to countries and you just wouldn't see disability. And I'm like, there's got to be disability somewhere here. Where are the people? Because they were hidden. And it just sparked in me this idea that we could build systems and write laws and put in place structures that really enabled inclusion. And, in Canada anyway, we have really strong human rights framework and system, but it's very reactive. Like I said, you have to wait till someone's discriminated against. So, you have to be denied a service or a job or housing. And then this entire system kicks in, and it's up to the individual to go and fight that fight. And then 3 years later, someone might tell you that you shouldn't have been denied that job or kicked out of your housing because it was so reactive. So I was really hell-bent, quite frankly, on changing all of that. So that's kind of me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Sif, I wonder if I could bring you in here, because I saw you agreeing, and you've talked before about moving from universal design to universal courtesy, and that really, I think, marries well. Would you like to tell us some more about that?
Yeah, for me, universal design, I think, is a concept a lot of us know. It's about designing our building. It's about designing our products. So it's up for everyone to use it. For example, we have the House of People with Disabilities in Denmark, which is universally designed. It's really great place for me as a wheelchair user to work, but it's really great actually for everyone because it's really good climate. Then we have the other side, which is universal courtesy, and it's more about welcoming. So if you have a nice hotel, you want to welcome all your guests. If you have a restaurant, you want to welcome your guests. If you have a workplace, you should also feel, it might not be welcome, but you want to encourage an atmosphere where you all thrive. And it's not so much about, you should couple it, of course, with universal design, that I as a wheelchair user should be able to go there. But there are so many small things in moving and around in a work environment, which is not about the ramp or the available space, but it's more about, is it allowed that you can come and raise your voice about, I have an issue? Is it okay if you have ADHD, for example, to say that, it doesn't work for me if I'm given verbal assignment. You know, for me, it's much better if I have a written assignment. Is it okay for like that to have that communication? Can you discuss that, you know, I need a break during the day because then I'm able to function much better. So it's all the small things and the openness of the employer and the surrounding colleagues and so on to make an environment where both persons with disability, but also all others, because we all have something. You might have a back issue one day. We might have had not enough sleep because we had a baby crying all night. You know, all these small things. None of us are perfect workers all the time. We all need some small courtesies to make the work better and for us to be able to do more at work.
Absolutely, and thank you for that beautiful explanation of that concept. I want us to move in because we've started talking a little bit about the barriers that each of you have described. So Matt, I wondered if you wanted to jump in here maybe and start to talk about what have you seen get in the way of careers in public service?
Thanks, Ashlyn. Look, I think there's a couple of things for me. One is, by the way, I really like Sif's idea of universal courtesy, and I'd like to explore that more because I think it's a really, really powerful reframing. Especially around behaviour, actually. That's a fascinating thing for me as someone with autism. Look, there's a couple of things. Firstly, I think we need to really honour the subtle barriers and discrimination, and I'm gonna explain that in a quite personal way. I mean, I think one of the things about the public service is the public service has quite a hierarchical structure. And so access to people like Minister Qualtrough can be quite targeted in terms of who comes and who sees who, right? And I think one of the things that I've come across is the subtle, we won't take Matt to ministers' meetings because we're worried that Matt might melt down. And that Matt has a range of knowledge that we want to tap into, but we're worried that if conversations get hard or courageous or tricky, that will be challenging from a emotional management point of view, right? And I suppose for me, I go, okay, well, look, how do we create an environment where actually I'm of benefit to the minister, right? So my workplace says to me and has said constantly, I'm the expert on the UNCRPD, right? I'm going to be the person that if the minister has a issue around that in terms of constituents, she wants to tap into that information, right? How do we how do we create an environment where I can safely say, okay, well, actually, I want to transmit that information to you because that's a benefit to you. It makes me feel good because I know that I'm influencing the decisions that she makes, right? And I guess the way in which we've worked that through, so from a solutions-based point of view, the way in which we've worked that through is that I have access to all our deputy chief executives. So our deputy chief executives can tap into me and tap into my information. And that's fine, and I'm mid-career, and that's appropriate, right? I suppose the question that's in my head is, what happens in 5 years when in the public service there's a natural progression that says, well, naturally you should reach into kind of deputy chief executive space, and then I go to an interview and I have a good interview, but I know because I've been on interview panels that there will be questions like, oh, but what happens if Matt melts down in front of it? Because that's tricky and that's hard for us to manage, right? And it's like, actually, let's have a conversation. So let's have a conversation with the minister's office about, okay, have a safe space where if things are getting a bit stressful in a conversation, and look, we have hard conversations in the public service. We can say, actually, Matt, you can vacate for 5 minutes, right? And that won't be judged against you. The minister won't judge that against you. That will be fine, right? You can come back if you want to. And actually, everybody's a winner, right?
Yeah.
So I think for me, it's the subtle stuff. And yeah, I'd be interested to see what participants feel about that and what solutions we might come up with there.
Thank you, Matt. That's a really nice articulation of the subtle stereotyping. And actually, as Clenton was saying, let's look for people's human potential. So let me bring Minister Qualtrough in. You sort of, there's quite a clear example. Matt and I were talking before this about the style of the Westminster system. So I'm curious about your reaction. And is there a need to change the styles of leadership that we have to be more inclusive?
Absolutely, Matt. Come work for me. We'll make it work. But listen, I mean, for me, when I thought about this question, it's about walking into a room and people making assumptions about what you can and cannot do, and you've literally not opened your mouth, right? People find out for me that I'm legally blind or that I'm significantly visually impaired, and they've decided without even meeting me what I can do, what I can't do, how I need to do things. And so you spend kind of all of your, in my world, political capital, but credibility, just reassuring others that you can do the things that they wouldn't question other people can do. And you know, coupled with that is this idea that people get stuck in doing things the same way. So if you don't do things the same way because it doesn't work for you, and by the way, I can be super productive if you let me do things a different way. You then spend all your time reassuring others that even though you won't be doing it the same way, you're going to get it done. And, you know, again, you know, leaning on my experience in law and in politics, it's this idea that treating people the same means treating them equally. And that is a massive, I'd say, blind spot, for lack of a better word, in the public service. This idea that equality is about sameness. And so everybody gets the same size cubicle if you're at a certain level, and you get the same work environment if you're at a certain level. And that's actually equality. So if you have Crohn's and you'd like a cubicle that's a little closer to the washroom because of your personal circumstances, while the big cubicles are for people with more seniority, like there's just so much comfort in sameness in our public service anyway. You know, for me, having a cabinet minister who was legally blind, like, just terrified the system, because I couldn't read the binders of information ministers get at night. I needed it on a tablet. I can't make eye contact with the Prime Minister when I want to speak. I can't stand up in the House of Commons and just by having the speaker nod at me, like this, it's a very visual world, and changing those things took a lot of time, and it felt super risky. I mean, the public service is so risk adverse. But I can totally relate to what Matt talks about, just this notion of just that you're someone who doesn't do things the way things have always been done, and just being in that space makes people uncomfortable. And then you add on top of that the understanding of the preconceptions of what you can and can't do, and those are really, like, this attitudinal barrier thing it's a real thing. And you know, for me, it became about being super confident in talking about my disability and helping people understand that my disability is separate from my skill set, and they're not interwoven in this way that they defines my competence. Yeah, I might do things differently, but you know, maybe we need a little bit of that around here, quite frankly. But it's just having, and it felt super vulnerable and risky to, you know, and I also needed leaders to support me. And, you know, I was very lucky to have found in our Prime Minister, who's now become a friend, but certainly didn't know him at all before. I mean, now he won't actually, and I don't know how it works, but in our cabinet, things get table dropped. So there's a last minute item, and you get, the material gets dropped on the table. And literally he will stop the meeting and say, Carla, can you read it? And if I can't read it, he will put that item aside and ask people to go get accessible materials and then get back to that item on the agenda. Well, that only happened a couple of times, as you can imagine. It is now absolutely table dropped in an accessible format. But it took him doing that because he would see that they would drop this material in front of me. I can't make decisions to help run a country if I can't read it. But it really took him consciously, as a leader, as an ally, basically calling people's hands. You know, I mean, I guess I would say honestly, before I would sit at the boards and tables and I would try and wing it because I didn't want to bring attention to the fact that I couldn't see very well, or I thought I just didn't have that confidence that now I've had in 30 years in professional career. But it's about these damn assumptions that people make and how much time we spend challenging them.
Minister, I'm conscious you have other commitments, so I just want to stay with you and just take us into, as we're thinking, or when people want to make positive change in their context, what is it that they need to do? Where should we start? And you've talked about two really great strategies. There is that leadership personally, in terms of actually just talking about it and own it, and the leadership of allies. Are there any other messages you'd like to leave us with about positive change?
Oh, well, thank you. First of all, this has just been fantastic. Invite me back anytime. But I'm a big fan of IIDL. Listen, I think that it's about community. It's about understanding allyship and the importance of it. It's about collaboration. It's about finding the people in your space who will champion you. And I mean, this is super important when you have a disability, but it's also just, I mean, mentoring benefits anyone having a disability or not. But it is about just it's the confidence piece, and it's having to have a confidence earlier on in your career than other people have to, you know, build that confidence. Because but I just think that there's, you know, the culture, the opportunity that comes right now, as was said at the beginning, with the focus on inclusion, and quite frankly, as Minister of Employment, having massive labor shortages is quite helpful for my disability, you know, rights agenda, because employers in Canada, at least, are having to tap into talent pools that they've never had to reach into before. And in our world, in Canada, that's Indigenous youth and persons with disabilities. And so really taking advantage of the opportunity of the times to push a disability rights agenda. And whether it's in workplaces or in community spaces or on boards, the more allies you can have, and the more people who are like you that sit around these tables, because it is lonely, and it's heavy. You know, this feeling that if you weren't there, people wouldn't have the conversation that is so important that you're having right now. But you get there, and you find your people and you find your mentors. And believe me, Matt, we have our own hissy fits, meltdowns at the ministerial level as well. So it's, I would join you in that safe space for sure. But I think they're lucky to have you in your government, and you're welcome in mine anytime. So thank you so much for having me, everybody. I apologize. I do actually have to go. I don't actually know what I'm doing, but I'll find out in a second, and we'll talk to you all later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sif, let me bring you back in, because you were talking about learning from other inclusion and equity groups. And so I'm curious about your reflections on this question of how do we make positive change when we want to make better employers and create career paths?
One thing is to realize that we are not all the same. And some things are, you know, sometimes some things are more difficult. Some of you mentioned also earlier that we need, as a person with a disability, at least that's been my tactics, but I think it's the same from the women's movement and so on. We always need to do it 110%. If you want to become a leader, you have to go beyond all the time to show that you can do things and things like that. And some of the times it's the most hard, it has been the most hard for me, has been those extra things. They're having a nightcap after work, having the social activity which takes place in a place that's not accessible, that not suddenly we have the meeting not at a regular place, which I would know as a wheelchair user works for me, but suddenly we have to meet somewhere else, which I'm not sure about. I would have to go make a lot of, will it work for me? We have some changed routines during the day. So instead of doing what works for me, and I know works for me, and I can do my small things would make my day better, then it would also be that now suddenly we have this one, and it has to be exactly like this we're doing things. So all the small things, which is actually a lot of our work is this flexibility and so on. But if we have to give all the time a bit of extra, and it would be amazing that if, as a disability leader, we weren't always called to go above and beyond on everything, but we could just sometimes relax a bit and just to be a regular person who works regular hours, because it is hard also. And I think for me, it has been some of the struggle all the time to have recognized, and sometimes also I had one episode where I actually had a warning from my lead at the time because he felt I was not involved in the workplace, because as a wheelchair user, I don't sit all the way close to the table because I have the wheelchair, so it's difficult for me to get close to the table. And for her, she saw this distance from the table as me distancing myself from my colleagues. And she get a warning that, well, maybe you don't want to work here when you distance yourself in this way. So sometimes all these small things, which it's not about the ramp. It's really important. I really need my disability toilet also, but it's the small things which really falls heavy on us, and sometimes would really, if it's not all on us to fix all the small things, but if we have a colleague or sometimes a mentor, or as we heard earlier, a prime minister saying, is this accessible? No, it isn't. Then let's make it accessible. It's really valuable.
Sif, thank you. That's a really powerful story and a great reaction. Matt, I want to give you, I saw that there were many things that you were really reacting to. So I want to give you a minute or two for maybe some final thoughts, and then we'll send our wonderful guests into breakout rooms.
Yeah, look, thanks, Esmond. And look, what a wonderful conversation to have. And I thank Sif and Carla for their insights and honesty. I guess what I was reflecting on was, again, the interesting things around power, that it takes, like, in terms of Minister Qualtrough's story, I know, because I've worked in public service, how that rolled, right? That actually the Prime Minister said, you must make this accessible. It happens really quickly. Why? Because the Prime Minister said. Right, and I'm not saying that is a negative on Minister Qualtrough at all, but it's kind of like that's how that hierarchy and power stuff happens, right? Whereas Sif's concept of universal courtesy, it says actually, what enables people to do their job, and it shouldn't take somebody higher up a hierarchy to say this is what we must do. Right? It's like, actually, in order for Minister Qualtrough to do her job effectively, and we're paying her a significant amount of money to do that, let's make it work, right? And actually, those processes, changing those processes, is helpful for everybody, because getting a paper late, and quite an important paper, is an interesting and somewhat discourteous practice. So actually changing those processes is helpful for everybody. It's not just helpful for Minister Qualtrough. The other point I'd make is, I think that part of it for me is, I was at a World Autism Awareness Day breakfast recently, where a young person got up and said, look, the thing that I've struggled most with in terms of the neurotypical world is it really likes me when it benefits from me, right? So when I'm using my skills and talents in ways that benefit, then everybody loves me and it's all wonderful, right? But when I behave a little bit differently in order to get that done, suddenly it's always a problem, right? And it's kind of like, actually, we need to mature that. We need to say, look, we need to get beyond that. And the other thing I would say is, look, and this is a positive to finish last, right? The public service is dealing with some of the most complex and wicked problems, right? That's a policy term, right? Some of the most complex problems socially around, right? The minister referenced it in terms of employment, right? Actually, what you want to have is a range of ways of thinking about those problems and working through those problems, because having just a mono cultural or mono gendered view on how to solve those problems clearly hasn't solved them. So here's the thing. I want to help solve some of New Zealand and increasingly the world's social issues. I want to help with that. That's why I do what I do. What I need from people is accommodations or courtesies that allow me to do that. And if we can come to that, then actually that's really good for everybody. So I think, yeah, those would be my observations. Wonderful.
Well, thank you so much, Sif. Thank you so much, Matt. And in their absence, thank you very much to Clenton and to Minister Qualtrough. So now we're going to move into our breakout rooms for the next 15 minutes. And the purpose of these breakout rooms is to allow you to talk together about what was the most important thing that you heard. You have moderators to help you in your breakout room, and we'll come back briefly to hear from everyone and then go for a break so we can all refresh and come back for our next conversation. So don't hesitate to reach out on chat if you need any help. Otherwise, enjoy your conversation. So I'd like to now invite Maria Montefusco, who's an investigator with the Swedish Agency for Participation, to just reflect on some of the thoughts that were shared and how it relates to the context in Europe. Maria, over to you.
Thank you. It has been, there's been so many things that just got stuck in my head now. So I think it's quite difficult to, you know, get your mind around everything and just, you know, trying to find ways to pronounce what was there before and now. But this enriching experience of talking to you. But I just wanted to mention that when we were talking about arranging this this webinar, Aisling and Eddie and Ola and I and Malin last year, we were talking about how to contextualize that to the AG. You know how it is. You have to find the right context to position your activities. And Sweden holds the presidency right now of the Council of the European Union, which is like the Council of Ministers of the European Union. And so during the presidency, which goes on for another month exactly, actually, so until the last day of June, Sweden has in several ways highlighted the EU strategy on the rights of persons with disability. And these issues that we're talking about today, about inclusion and leadership and creating preconditions for well, personal growth, but also societal change, is very present in the strategy of the rights of persons with disabilities, which EU adopted in March 2021. And we would like to connect this discussion that we have today with one of the flagship initiatives of the the strategy and the priority, which is actually, it's called that the EU should lead by example. And I think this is a very important part of the strategy, and also a priority that the EU has that we can work with a lot. And the actions that the EU will take is about both improving accessibility and also diversity in the European Commission, which they will do, or we will do, because it's our institutions for us who live in EU countries, by promoting equality through both accessibility interventions or measures, but also about becoming a more inclusive employer. So the Commission has adopted a new HR strategy, human relations strategy, which I think is quite interesting if you think about that. It's an employer that holds 32,000 colleagues around the region in 200 workplaces, and the potential in changing the environments to be more inclusive here. It's hard work, but I think if you look into the different actions that have been taken and that will be, it's quite inspiring also. And they're also working with several of the aspects that have been brought up today. So they lift up role models, they find role models, they call out for role models in different ways, and give advice and support, and try to drive that change from the inside. And I think it's quite inspiring. In this session, there, as I said, has been so many things said, but in the discussions today, I think it's extremely relevant, as it's about not only the preconditions around, what are the preconditions for inclusion and participation in a workplace in general, which is actually a right stated in the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that we are always referring to. It's a right to be included, but in this session, I think it's so important to get into what is necessary for people to grow and take place and take the space we need, and to become one's highest potential. And that is not a right, but it should be possible for everyone who has the talent and skills and qualifications, and who wants to become a leader. And all of those complex combinations of, preconditions, personal skills, approaches, and also inclusive, supportive, and perhaps challenging environments, and crazy career pathways that Minister Qualtrough put it. I think we have touched upon so many different important aspects of how to move forward. I don't know, Aisling, if I should continue. I think we have a lack of time here, but if it's not too early, yeah. I just want to again thank you, Aisling and Eddie, and everyone for these the conversations and the important possibility to share experiences and knowledge about these things. As Malin mentioned in the beginning, that change is not, I think, possible without getting rid of the loneliness, the feeling of being lonely in a position, and together we can manage and lead the change that is needed. And also from the Agency for Participation, we are really proud to having being a part of this arrangements. But thank you so much, Aisling and Eddie, for doing this together with us, and the kind of welcoming atmosphere and also a little bit challenging atmosphere that you created. So thank you.
Thank you so much for those closing comments. Maria, really appreciate your time and thoughtfulness. We are running over time, and we know our many colleagues around the world have different things to get to. So I'll close the session, but we'll, if you want to stay on, you can hear the final wrap-ups, and if you need to go, you're most welcome to go. But I just want to say thank you to everyone who's attended. We can't make these things happen without everyone participating. So a huge thank you to all of our colleagues at the Swedish Agency for Participation, at the International Initiative for Disability Leadership, our panel members, and most of all our attendees. Have a wonderful day, and best of luck with the important work that all of you are doing.